Professor Wilkins is a retired professor of patristics at the University of Virginia, and he's a great, eminent scholar. And sometimes scholars slightly exaggerate to make a point. And I mean, Wilkin would say if he were here, we'd all be in awe of his wonderful learning. He would just say, it's time for us to quit being so theologically thin and really get embedded in communities where we are really nurtured in discipleship and discernment. Then he wouldn't say, while you're doing that, don't worry about it when you go out into the world. I mean, he would say, be salt and light, do it in your business, do it in your law, well, maybe not law firms. But go ahead. But what he's trying to say is that we really need theologically more. We need to be deepened with confidence in our own communities. And I hear the same thing from Rod Dreher. When he finishes, I want to say at Georgetown, I want to say, well, Rod, I think what you're saying is go be really involved in your church. You know, don't go join a monastery. Really get with the program. In other words, Rod Dreher is trying to say, we have so focused on the state of American culture, and we've been so frantic, we've forgotten to grow spiritually. That's why I think the work of the Institute is so vital, so important. So Wilkin has said the church should be the church. Stanley Hauerwas says the church should be the church. Richard Newhouse used to say the church should be the church. What they're saying by that is the church must remember that we, like Augustine said, we have a direction and we know where we're going, and we need to be deeply embedded in that so that we don't lose our way when we do get in the culture and become insecure and frantic and freak out. I think that's what Wilkin is saying. But yes, thank you for that question. The answer is no. No, let me say this, Nicholas. I come from the Reformed tradition, and but I have great respect for the Anabaptist tradition, which has cultivated this Christ against culture worldview of living separate from the world, but while in it. So I'm a Reformed Anabaptist, if you understand what I mean. What I want to say is that I have great admiration and respect for those churches and communities that really are closely knit, where people really are in touch with the way the false church is trying to be in touch with people who are struggling with marriages, having drinking problems, or out of work. Churches that have ministries that really, really experience koinonia, not only in our joys, but in our struggles. And so I can't, for instance, I'm not an American religious historian, so I don't want to try to just start throwing out churches, but I'm thinking about church bodies that combine the best of the Reformed tradition with that Anabaptist sense of we are called to be what Francis Schaeffer called a pilot project, a city on a hill, a separated community. And I respect that part of the Anabaptist tradition. While at the same time, I want to say to Rod Dreher, as a Reformed person with the Reformed view of work and calling, you all may know from having attended many institute things, the Reformed view of work and calling is simply that there is, all of work has dignity, all of life, everybody's work, Luther and Calvin pointed out, is important. From the shoeshine person to the person who parks our car in the Tower Club, to people who wait our tables, to people who do very important work here in Washington. All of that, there's no such thing as, all of work is sacred. And I just want to say to Rod Dreher, going away to a monastery, we're going to leave a hole. Things are looking bad now. If we leave, they're going to get worse, much worse. So being salt and light is always going to be our duty, no matter what the Supreme Court says. No matter what they decide, we still have to cultivate communities with strong families and strong marriages so we can still be a light to the culture. I was at a conference recently in Dallas where a young man got up and raised his hand. He said, I live in Boston, and I work in a business, a thriving business, and if my view of traditional marriage is expressed, I am the victim of great incivility. So right now, civility, I've had to reword that civility part, because it used to be I was trying to say to people on the Christian right, tone it down a little and be civil so you can win people. But now, people hold to our views. We're going to be the victims of a lot of incivility. But we need to respond with civility. It's just why? It's our duty. We're called to it. our Lord has told us to, no matter what. So this young man asked the question, so how can I'm being told immediately that I'm a bigot. So how can I come across not as a bigot? And I was on a panel with several people, and we said, we can't prevent you from being called a bigot, but we can tell you how to respond so that you don't look like a bigot. In other words, your response to their attack is so crucial. And we've got it throughout the Gospels what our response should be, over and over again. It's just the fact, Thomas, it's new to us to be in this position of being made to sound like we're speaking a foreign language. You're telling me I'm like Bull Connor because I believe that a man should be married to a woman? You're going to tell me that I'm some sort of Southern racist because I hold to the view of marriage that's been this way up until about 30 years ago? It's really uncomfortable. And I work with a lot of people in the elite media and the liberal media who, nobody holds the views that we hold in this room. None of them. Up and down the hall. But the Christians who work in those places feel the pressure. They feel the pressure. And so we're going to have to talk about, when we talk about the civility piece, about how to respond to incivility while we're trying to be civil. It's very uncomfortable to be told you're a bigot because you hold to a Judeo-Christian view of male-female relationships. So our challenge is to learn how to be Christian in the midst of a hostile culture that we used to take for granted. That's not so bad because it's going to cause us to grow and to be pruned and to learn to grow up. It's not so bad. Maybe what the Lord is doing is calling the church to quit being so soft, but in fact go deeper. And then when people see the way we respond, it might draw them to us. Paul tells us that in Romans, that by heaping coals of fire upon their head, they may actually say, why do you act that way? Why are you so nice to me even though I treat you so... Why do you treat me so nice even though I think you're a bigot? It's a great challenge to be a witness now, Tom. We need to be proactive right now. And this is a good challenge for the Institute to maybe bring in Christian legal scholars to talk about. The challenges right now on the questions of religious freedom, religious liberty could not be more urgent now. And being civil doesn't mean just be passive, as I said. It doesn't mean just say, go ahead, roll over us. No, being civil, we also need to be discerning, and we need to get the best legal scholars. Right now, meetings are occurring in this town and around the country by Christian legal scholars. And I was in one in Philadelphia last week with legal scholars who were talking about how to protect the interests of nonprofits and parachurch organizations when they come and say the CSL Institute, a gay person wanted to work for you all and you wouldn't hire them, they're going to sue you. And you say, well, we have religious freedom obligations that we can, because of our theological beliefs, we don't hire people like that. They're going to sue you. Well, people at places like the Institute and other parachurch groups, and even the church, are going to have to be ready legally how to understand how to explain to the courts our First Amendment liberties and freedoms. And then to your other question about, we got people losing their jobs for refusing to bake cakes and to do photography at gay weddings. This is a huge challenge. Civility is not a wimp word. It means get ready and get the best lawyers on our side to win these cases in court, because the battles are going to come now post the recent Supreme Court decision. Look, Rod Dreher lives in a small town in Louisiana. He's a former Methodist who became a Catholic, who became an Orthodox Christian. He goes to a small Orthodox church in a small town in Louisiana, and they get together, and they have fellowship. And they're practicing the Benedict Option. They had no other choice. I think that if Rod were here, he would, and if I said to him, since we all live in the different towns around in Virginia, what do you suggest us? We all move to a farm in Upperville, Virginia? No. I think we just need to do a better job of being community where we are, of really, really experiencing deep fellowship in our women's groups, in our men's groups, in our fellowship groups, in our Sunday schools, in our church attendance. We need to better, what I like about the Benedict Option is saying, hey folks, we're not the majority culture anymore, we need to get together and encourage one another. and we need to build each other up. Well, this is what the church is supposed to be anyway. So I would say, Rod, if you're sitting here, Rod, you're just saying for the church to be the church. I don't think it's a funny thing. Rod Dreher, you read his blog, he's a provocative, thoughtful writer. When you question him on these very points, he said, well, I don't mean to withdraw, and I don't mean leave the culture, and I'm not really anti-political, although everything I just said was anti-political. There's all these qualifications. So I think he's being provocative for a purpose, which is to say, there used to be monks who said, Rome is going to hell and we're leaving town. And that's what's happening to America, and so he's kind of saying that. Well, if what he says gets us all together better in encouraging each other and caring for each other, more intentionally than ever before, more intentionally, meeting in fellowship, praying for each other, caring for each other in our struggles, then all to the good. That's a form of the Benedict Option in the sense of us being really better at experiencing koinonia. When I was a young, you didn't get this in my introduction, Joel. When I was a young new Christian, I was a Christian hippie lefty, and I lived in a Christian commune, literally. And we were committed to, we hated America because we were left-wing political nuts. We read the Berrigans, and we were going to live in community and change the world by our light, by the fact that we loved one another. It was kind of crazy. It was nuts. But you know what? There's actually something to the fact of people getting together better, being more intentional about really getting together. One of the problems of modern technological society is we're all so far apart from each other. So I think the movement in the late 60s and early 70s of a lot of Christian commune movements was a kind of a Benedictine movement of we all need to live together, eat together, have meals together. And we did. Now, thankfully, I moved out of that. Maybe you could tell. I hope you could. But there's something about us having more meals together and more fellowship together. And by the way, non-believers, when they see that, are really drawn to it. They really are. There's a famous reporter in this town who, for a moment, she goes to one of our churches, used to work at National Public Radio, who, when she saw the koinonia in California, when she went to do a story on 3 megachurches, and she saw the way the Christians loved one another, cared for one another, and she wrote it up for the LA Times Magazine at the end of her interviews. Well, during the interview, she went and bought a New Testament, read through the whole New Testament. In her last interview, she said to the head of a big mega church in California, she said, I so much wanted to ask him, how can I become a Christian? Because I have seen the way Christians care for each other. But she said, as a reporter, I knew I couldn't ask. So I didn't. So we cut off the tapes, and the person she was interviewing, a famous person you would recognize, said to her, Barbara, it doesn't really matter to me what you think about our church. What matters to me is how you can become a Christian. She said, tell me how. Tell me how. Now, she would tell you today, it was the koinonia that she saw in those different, she was blown away by the fellowship hall, by the way people cared for each other. It was totally alien to her lonely, atomized, autonomous world. And so if we can be the Benedict Option in different ways, by the way, the Institute can do this by bringing people together, the way you do it now. It's a witness to the world. We have enough to worry about right here. And as far as opportunities, as I was just suggesting, there are opportunities galore. And I think it's true, and I put it in one of my parentheses, that we really ought to prepare for the casualties of our culture that are coming. And I hold a conference twice a year for journalists in Florida, and we've been doing it for 16 years, called the Faith Angle Forum. And it's not just for evangelicals, it's about religion in general, it's about radical Islam, it's about what would have been like if Mitt Romney had been president. We had sessions on Mormonism, but we had Tim Keller once, and all the questions after he made his eloquent presentation were about human sexuality and gay marriage. That's all they talked about. And at one point, and Britt Hume was there, Britt raised his hand and said, seems like everybody wants to talk to you about sex. I want to ask you, how do you choose music in your church? But on the human sexuality questions, and the transcript is on our website, Tim said something very interesting. He finally said, we're just going to have to disagree. because I see the biblical text saying this, and there was another journalist there who said she was a Christian but didn't think the Bible taught that. And he said, well, we're going to disagree. And as to where you think this is going, let's check back in about 30 years. Let's be sure to get together. In other words, he was basically saying, all right, let's see how that works out. Now, why would Tim Keller was not being relaxed or negligent. I think his Reformed faith was saying, all right, we'll see how this goes. And let's get together in 10 and 15 years, 30 years, and let's talk about the sociological data of child rearing and of marriage and of the state of gay marriage and of divorce in gay marriages and of promiscuity in those kind of marriages, which even the New York Times has already highlighted, that most gay marriages have an agreement in open marriage. We have an agreement. We're married, but we're both going to do what we want to do. That was on the front page of the New York Times about 8 months ago. And it was saying this is a problem. So what I'm saying about what I was struck by Tim's answer was this ability to say, we'll see how that works out. In the meantime, we'll get together. And I think we'll have to be ready to take in people. Some of them are relatives, some of them are children, some people we know. They're going to come back and say, I made a wrong turn. I committed to a worldview that has basically not been helpful or healthy for me. Can I come to your church? Can I be a part of your fellowship? I think it's going to happen, and so that's the opportunity. We have it on good authority and on divine command what we're to do and how we're to respond to persecution, to insult, to attack. We're told how we're to respond. Meanwhile, civility does not mean lack of prudence or wisdom. It means prepare legally to get ready for our individual liberties to be protected, especially religious freedom, religious liberty. And meanwhile, we just have a duty on the basis of the Sermon on the Mount and the entire New Testament how we're to respond in the midst of this bad situation. And so what I'm suggesting is, as we're being called bigots and that we're using hate speech, that we be clear theologically and personally and in our very persona how we respond to it.
You seem to be putting a lot of...
I'm putting a lot of emphasis on Christian charity as well.
And law. But we seem
No, I'm putting emphasis on law because we are, as I was suggesting earlier, going to be the victims of lawsuits. We already are. In Oregon and Washington, it's coming. And there are people on the left in the LGBT community who are not going to, they use religious liberty as a scare words when they talk about it on the news.
Well, what about putting in judges that were not so liberal?
I'm all for it. I'm all for it. I'm not here to make a case for any candidate, but I'm about to make one. No, I'm just kidding. Boy, let me just say this to those, in closing, let me just say, for those people, we were talking about this earlier, Tom, who want to say, it's really not about politics, it's about the culture. We got to change the culture. My view is it's about the culture and it's about politics. It's really important who appoints the next judges. They will influence the culture. And for people who overemphasize that cultural point, many of them friends of mine, I want to say that racism in the South was not only a cultural problem, it was a legal problem. And some people in the South said, well, this is a cultural problem. It's going to take 400 years. I mean, it's going to take a few more decades. Let's just wait. And Dr. King said in his letter to Birmingham jail, we have waited and waited and waited. We just need a few laws to change. And when the laws changed, the culture wasn't revived, but it was reformed. And so what I want to say is law and culture work in tandem. And so for your next speaker who comes and just talks about culture, I just remember what I said. Law is important also. So that's why I'm saying we need to have the best Christian lawyers, make sure that our interests are protected, and we do it in a loving and kind fashion. Thank you for listening.